back to the Rake. Our guest today is a run-at-once coach, a heads-up end boss, an almost professional chef, and an entrepreneur. He's the owner of 7 of the ocean's finest Krabby Patty franchises. Kevin Rabichow, welcome to the Rake.
Thanks, Ben. Happy to be here.
You are launching an exciting new teaching tool for, I guess, a variety of poker formats coming to run at once soon. And you're going to be doing heads up, I think, as well as MTTs, as well as cooking. All of your areas of expertise really are going to have little groups. Why don't you tell us about the motivation behind the structure of this? Because I don't think any other coaching site has a structure quite like this one.
Yeah, this is a product that I'm pretty excited about because it's pretty much like the middle ground between private coaching and like being part of a community, right? So we're calling it a group coaching program. It's semi-private coaching, which basically means like a small group. And like we're trying to replicate think of a study group with other players who are trying to move up through the ranks in similar games, or even like the communities that build within staking programs, right? These aren't always accessible to everyone. Not everyone's trying to get backed and grind MTTs. Not everyone's, able to commit to private coaching for an extended period of time to work on their game. So I've been working for a few months with Run It Once to try and turn this into something that we can offer on a larger scale. And I think it's just I just think it's a really important structure to be able to like meet a student where they're at, or to meet like someone who's part of a training site where they're at, and try to like cater a coaching experience or a learning experience to them. So that's pretty much the logic behind building this program.
Is that a structure that you had coming up through poker at some point in your career not as a student, but as a study? Or did you have a small group of friends who were working on the same games, either in heads up or in tournaments? And what sort of advantages did you find that structure had? Because I, having the personality that I do, had no poker friends coming up.
Yeah, this was a big, for me, this is the entire poker learning experience. Like I certainly can't speak for everyone, but when I'm thinking of like when I first played, let's say Heads Up Sit and Goes, I was part of like MSN chat groups or whatever. I'm dating myself, of course, but chat groups of just the regs in that game, right? Or think of the 2+2 forums, like the Heads Up No Limit forum. You get connected with the regs, and just it gives you this community of people who establish, this is like the meta. Here's what I think is going on. Here's like the common problems I'm running into in these games. Here's like the tricks that I've found that are working right now. This is how at least I learned poker for pretty much my whole career. I definitely, I went through that a couple of different times, and the model, I suppose, I think can also be really valuable in coaching. So like I've been on the side of that where I was just like learning with friends and like playing a game with friends to get better. And then I've also been on the side where I've like coached a group of people who are trying to do that exact same thing together.
You spoke about the meta and sort of tricks. That has been a little bit of my experience coming up through poker in the pre-solver era, was a lot of meta and tricks. Do you find that there's still room for that, and that it's still quite applicable in today's games with the tools that are available for studying?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think that's a common misconception. This is actually something that I was I think I was writing about this recently. I think that it's really easy to assume that because we have solvers on the market, that everyone has the same like level of knowledge and everyone's executing the same way with that information. And that's just not true. Any professional or semi-professional or just poker enthusiast who like picks up a solver and starts learning the game is going to like take in different amounts of information. They're going to execute in different ways. they're going to maybe like latch on to certain ideas that they think are cool and overdo it, or just test out everything and that they learn and try to exploit people with it. Node locking is obviously like a thing in PioSolver that people talk about a lot, right? These are like the whole, I guess the short answer to your question is like, yes, there's absolutely still a meta game in like every format that I'm familiar with. In high stakes 6max cash, I coach people who play high stakes on online today in 6max cash, and like that's got to be one of the most like solved competitive games around. And there's absolutely a meta game going on. Same with high stakes tournaments online. Same with obviously softer game environments as well, and definitely the case for heads up games whenever they do run, which is obviously not that often, but for sure.
I would like to just affirm your belief that people overdo the thing they just learned. As I watched a few things, I was targeting just overbetting. I was like, okay, I just want to, basically for commentary, I wanted to be able to recognize spots and be able to talk about it. And like I was doing the Doug challenge, as you know, and like the spots came up all the time. Like, and I want to at least understand why they're overbetting. Well, after watching maybe 3 hours of overbetting stuff, I saw it everywhere. I'm playing full ring cash and was like, oh, this looks like a good spot to do this. And all of a sudden I find myself just like going absolutely insane. I think your group coaching sounds a lot better. It's like, instead of targeting something specific that you want to work on and maybe watching like 5 run at once videos about it, you're going to take someone's entire game, right? And like top to bottom, just work on everything. So it's like not someone having to look for the thing themselves that they want to improve on. You'll be leak busting for them.
Yeah, that's kind of the key like perk of this environment, I think, is that, like, I mean, I should qualify like the constraints of the program. Like it's 4 weeks long. We do an hour and a half of one-on-one time, and then we do like weekly group meetings, and there's interaction within the group every day for that 4-week period. But the way we designed it is so that we initially sort of have one-on-one time with each of the members of the group, so that we can identify like, okay, this is where this player's at, like this is what they're struggling with, this is where their mind's at, this is the type of game that they have. And doing that with everyone like right at the beginning before we even have our first meeting, so that we can like launch the group with fresh information that says like, okay, we need to target to this player type who's at this stage of their career, which is like, to me, a big missing piece in like a lot of coaching or training sites or courses, is like the coach decided where to start and where to end, right? The coach decided like, well, this is what I want to teach today. And the students who are lucky enough to be at that exact moment in their learning process will benefit the most from it. But if the coach just met that person and said, hey, where are you at? Like, what can I help you with right now? It would take 10 minutes, 15 minutes to like immediately know where to start and be the most effective for that person.
It's interesting to me because I think Jamie was sort of making a different point, or I heard a different point in Jamie's thoughts, where she was talking about how you don't know what you don't know, and how having a group to bring up things that you hadn't thought of can kind of open your game up and have you approaching things in a different way. Whereas you're talking about going to a coach and sort of identifying where you're at yourself. I think, to me, that's fairly easy to do with self-directed learning, to be like, okay, I have this problem I keep running up against. I'm going to find the run at once video that applies to this spot, or, over betting or delayed C bets, building a flop check back range, those sorts of things. And that's fairly easy. But having a group of 5 or 6 people that you're all working with together, and having someone say, oh, this is something that I've found that's working really well, can get you, or this is something I'm struggling with, can get you thinking about things that you didn't even realize were in the game that you were missing. And I think that's one of the things that can be really helpful over self-directed learning, just bouncing ideas off each other and having new approaches to spots and new ways to attack spots. You said something else, Kevin, about moving to softer formats. I know you used to be a heads-up crusher. Maybe you still are a heads-up crusher, but it's hard to get action. And you moved from heads-up to full ring tournaments. Do you ever look down at Queen 10 off under the gun and just regret every decision you've made in your life?
I can certainly say that there are habits that I've developed. I mean, I played Heads Up as my pretty much only game for like a decade. So yes, tournaments can occasionally make me, miss the old days, so to speak. But I think the reality is they're just a super interesting format, and I really enjoy like having a new problem or like a puzzle to tackle. And in the learning process for MTTs is super interesting to me because there's infinite details to look at. I wouldn't say that I I definitely wouldn't say that I regret my decision. I'm actually, if there's anything I regret, it's not just like taking it seriously earlier, because I think that the tournament landscape is just like so much more promising and so much more interesting. And it almost makes me like look back at Heads Up and think like, wow, what a simple game that was. Like like I didn't realize how much of a luxury I had to be playing such an easy game. That's
really interesting, because I think, years ago, the consensus was that tournaments were the easiest, or at least I think they were easy in terms of how soft they were, but there are a lot more complexities, whereas Heads Up, you only have one other hand and one other player to consider. And I think,
and there's no ICM, and like your stack sizes are going to be the same, like you're 200 big blinds deep or whatever. Like I feel like tournaments,
there's more factors held constant, right?
Yeah. To go back to your point about like not knowing what you don't know, like I think that in tournaments, if you think about where the games were 10 years ago, the average player didn't know any of the details about any of the complexities of tournaments. They maybe just knew like, oh, when you're really short, you need to start going all in instead of min raising. And now we're at this like solver era point of tournaments in 2021, where it's like, in this specific spot, you need to have limps or you're terrible. And in this other specific spot, like having limps is atrocious. And, when you're 15 big blinds deep and the opener is 30, but the big blind has 50, you need to play this way, which is completely different from that other situation where you also had 30 big blinds and the opener had 15. And it's so wildly complex.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with a friend who was a decent tournament player. We used to bounce hands off each other all the time. And I made the comment about like, people don't really call light enough. So like shoving, maybe wider than Nash is better and whatever. And he's like, well, it's because they don't have call charts. They just have shove charts. And I was like, what? And he was a good player. I was like, well, here you could just figure it out right here. And it was like, now it's like the 70-year-old guy who's a rec player who has a job. He comes in with Snapshove on his phone. And that is so different. There used to just be money to be made from doing a tiny amount of studying or being aware of like shoving and calling ranges. And I don't know, it's definitely different from that now. And I feel like that's something with like COVID taking over here. I feel like people crack down on studying a lot. And I feel like that edge of just knowing some people are too lazy to look for very easy solutions, that's going to be gone too when live poker comes back. That's my fear.
I'm really enjoying this reminiscing about the old days when nobody knew anything. This is my heyday right there. I knew just like a little bit, and that was enough.
It wasn't that much different in Heads Up No Limit. I can assure you, we were just at different stages of the learning process.
So speaking of Heads Up and tournaments, you recently did with Pads a Heads Up module for his Pads on Pads course on Run It Once. I looked at your tournament results, and in the biggest tournament spot of your life, you got second. Why should I listen to you?
That's a very reasonable question to ask. I would hope that I could refer you to my Heads Up experience in other formats, as well as my coaching experience in Heads Up. But I would be lying if I said that I won any of the biggest Heads Up spots of my life. I might be 0 for 4 in all of the biggest Heads Up spots that I've played since switching to tournaments. Maybe 1 for 4. I'm struggling to remember which ones were bigger than the others, but Yeah, completely valid. I try to encourage my students not to be results oriented, but I have to face the truth there.
I could go 0 for 4 on my own without your coaching.
Fair point. Yeah, I completely agree. No, but Pads actually, I do want to give credit, like where credit is due. Pads came into that module with just a ridiculous amount of preparation having already been done. He basically approached me saying like, I have all this amazing stuff ready. Like I've done the solver work. I have hand reviews. I have stuff that I want to look at. Like I've got my own strategies that are simplified versions of the solver. I want just like outside opinion. He basically just told me I've done all the work. Just, speak whatever comes to mind about like what could go wrong or like what your experience says is maybe slightly inaccurate. But he had just put together some really amazing stuff already. So I think that section of the course is really good, but I want to give him pretty much all the credit there and just say it's worth checking out to hear. Like, I think it's a cool format to have, two different coaches with different perspectives talking about the same content. I think that was really smart on his part to structure the course that way. He did the same thing with PKOs and Alex Theologis. And like, it's just really, it's more engaging when you hear, two different styles of players or two different opinions coming at the same material and just saying like, here's what I focus on. Mm-hmm. Here's the interesting thing to me. Like, here's the little, small detail that I focus on. And maybe here's the little small detail that I didn't realize was there before.
I like that too, because I think poker was, some people got attracted to poker because it didn't seem like as black and white. It wasn't the solver says do this and like solver approved or standard or the things that people say. And it's like, it is nice to hear different perspectives and realize there still is a little bit of creativity, a little bit of room for creativity in poker. And that it's not just, if this person made this play, it means they're terrible or, this is the one way to play a hand. So yeah, I do like that there's two different coaches going at it different ways. Do you think that your little pods that you're going to have of like 4 to 8 people, do you think that that's more what it's going to be like with like debate and different playing styles? Or is it going to be more of like a top-down structure where you're coaching them and they have to just learn?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really want to make it the former, right? I really want to make it like we are all learning from each other type of environment. I think that as the coach, like the most important thing that I can do is just like steer the ship, so to speak, like make sure that we're focusing on the right things and making sure the discussion is productive and making sure that like, people are spending their time the right way. They're spending their energy the right way in terms of like, prioritizing studying this over that or prioritizing, this river spot that's more common over that other river spot that's never going to happen again. Those are things that I can just direct them on based on experience. But we ran a trial of this in November and the group calls were super like open for everyone to speak. And what I tried to do, we would talk about, say, study methods. And what I tried to do is just like probe for everyone, like, how do you spend your study time, right? Like, what's your default? Give me a rundown of like, how do you spend a week studying? And like some people spent their whole time watching final table replays and some people spent all their time on a solver and some people just watch run it once videos. And there's value in all of that. But like, as the coach, I can say, well, you're at this point in your career and you're really good at these things and you need to work on those things. So why are you spending all your study time on this thing that's not addressing that issue, right? So like to hear from everyone and get all the perspectives, like all the different ideas, how do you bluff catch the river? Like, what do you pay attention to? Well, I pay attention to this detail and I like to look at this timing thing and I like to think about sizing in this way. Those are all like, we need to hear that stuff from everyone, right? That's the stuff that you don't know. And as the coach, I just kind of facilitate the discussion. I keep us on topic, that sort of thing.
Do you remember any single thing a student said that made you go, wow, or where there was a click for you, something you hadn't thought about in those discussions, or something that other students came back and said, holy cow, like that helped me so much to open up my thinking process? Was there one particular moment that sticks out or a couple of moments that stick out during the learning process?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I want to make sure that I have a good answer, because there definitely were. I mean, I know that. So I guess I'll answer by saying, like, I know what I do personally, right? So I know I've gone through this process of like self-reflection on like, how do I spend my study time, and how do I think about the game, and like, what am I missing, right? And I find like when I'm coaching certain players, I can think of a couple. Now that I'm focused on it, there's certain players who just like the way that they tackle a problem. Let's say that the problem they're facing strategically is, my opponent is aggressively betting the turn when I check behind on the flop. That's like the problem that they're facing. And the solution that I like gravitate towards is theoretical in nature. The solution I gravitate towards is like based on what the solver would do in that scenario. And then I coach some students and they're like, oh yeah, I just raise every time because like I've got this data and it just works. So I just do it. Like they're completely like all in on that completely different method than what I do. And then there's the other person who's like, oh yeah, like I have a really tough time there. Like I actually just never check back the flop because I want to avoid that. So there's like, now you've got these like three completely different, totally valid counters to this scenario that came up. And I think, I guess for me, I know that like that like, I don't care aggressive attitude doesn't come natural for me. So like when I see a student doing that and I see that it works, it's like encouraging for me, like, hey, you know, when you're playing, like, you should probably play more like that guy. Like you should probably, because I know that my like baseline is to like stay in my lane a little bit and like play kind of the right calling hands and the right raising hands and the right folding hands. And I don't latch on as easily to this like maybe more youthful, like optimistic idea that's just like, I'm just going to fucking raise because they don't call enough.
It's interesting because I definitely associate that with youthful, but not optimistic, just because of that's how I played poker for the majority of my career, and I was not an optimist, so it just worked. It's interesting to me that you called kind of all three of those solutions valid, because one of them I associate I'm just going to see bet all the time because I'm uncomfortable facing the check back. Yeah. I associate that with sort of an emotional issue and an emotional problem that I have, which is avoidance. I want to avoid uncomfortable scenarios. This isn't necessarily poker specific, but in life, I want to avoid uncomfortable scenarios. So I structure my life in a way that I don't run into them. And I kind of cut myself off from opportunities in order to avoid discomfort. And I think that's something that a lot of people have both in and out of poker. So I was interested that, you know, my personal bias is that, you know, of course, coming up with a theoretical solution that combats this strategy is acceptable. And of course, just sticking it in their eye every time because they don't call enough is acceptable. I'm familiar with that. How do you characterize the third thing as valid? Because that's something that I wouldn't do intuitively.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you. It's an emotional way to structure a poker strategy. And I think that as a coach, it's easy to tell someone, hey, that's an emotional strategy that you're using. That's stupid. Don't do that. Which I don't think is the right way to deal with that problem, because I think that it's more important that that person understands, okay, the reason that I play a certain way, I literally structure into my game plan, into the way that I execute, emotions that are natural and that are probably not going to go away overnight. Also, I mean, I guess just briefly, like strategically speaking, that does quote unquote solve the problem, right? I mean, it does technically avoid, like it sends you to a different problem, almost certainly. But it does plug that leak, so to speak. It's not the way that I would personally do it, but it does just send us to a different situation. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I understand that.
But to address like the I guess bigger issue at hand, is that I think that there's this like implicit assumption for a lot of poker players or poker coaches or just everyone in the space that we can just play like robots and that's like achievable. And it's not achievable, right? Like it's more practical, or it's way more productive, I think, to just like acknowledge what your emotional baseline is and how that influences your play, and then like build a strategy that tries to push yourself closer to optimal away from that strategy. So I wouldn't tell a student like, hey, the way that you're like avoiding this problem is wrong. I would tell them like, this is a spot that we need to make you comfortable in, because emotionally you're uncomfortable. So we need to like develop a full plan, right? Like a check down, check behind the flop, facing a turn bet plan that you can internalize and feel emotionally comfortable with, so that you can be in that scenario and execute something that you know is better than just avoiding the spot. But I think that if we just tell them like, you need to start checking back, like this is an emotional thing that you're doing by avoiding that spot, you're being illogical, like stop doing it. And I don't think that helps. I don't think that like solves the problem. I think they just start like being uncomfortable all the time while they play. And now they're anxious while they're playing, and they're putting themselves in these spots that they don't understand. And then they're just like, clicking buttons and feeling shitty about the way that they play. So
wait, there's another option.
So I think that, I mean, the way that I try to approach that off the felt is completely like, I mean, quite literally off the felt, right? So like playing the way that you feel is the best way for you to play in the moment, but then spending all of your study time addressing the like uncomfortable situations until you feel like you have a game plan ready. I mean, I've done this myself a lot in my career. Is like an example I'll give is way long ago in Heads Up, my flop c betting strategies were only one size on the flop. In every board texture, not like one size for every spot. I wasn't playing like D-Nex.
Bang bang.
Every board texture had like its size. That was
Right.
just like what I was comfortable with, right? I understood the mechanic of playing a strategy that only bet big on certain boards and only bet small on other boards. And I wasn't comfortable. I wasn't like ready to execute a strategy that was more complex than that. So I didn't like try to play some strategy that I didn't understand and just click around and fail a bunch of times. I prepared a strategy that helped me like understand what I was going to do to go down those lines that I didn't understand previously. And then once I had like that plan in place, I started executing it. You could certainly just try and fail and then reevaluate and kind of go through the iterative process of doing it. But I think as a coach, it's kind of like a little bit my responsibility to say like, okay, you're not finding success by doing this. So like, here's a plan that you can start with, and we'll just see what goes wrong. But at least you've got a plan, you've got a design on like how to execute this thing.
We interrupt this podcast with a message from our sponsors at Run It Once. The smell of green is in the air at Run It Once Poker. From now until April 4th, anyone who creates a new account on Run It Once Poker will receive €5 in SNG Select tickets. Plus, we'll match any first-time depositor's initial deposit up to a maximum of €50 in cash. And this is on top of our usual welcome bonus matching up to €600 on every deposit you make for the subsequent 30 days after your initial deposit. For full details, head to once.run/free5. That's once.run/FREE and the number 5. And, as always, if you're looking to improve your game, head on over to Run It Once Training, where you'll find the largest library of high-quality poker training content on the web, created by some of the greatest minds in the game, including Run It Once founder Phil Galfond. Sign up today at once.run/learn, and you'll get free access to 3 elite videos from high-stakes legends Phil Galfond, Ben Solsky, and Jason Kuhn. And now, back to the pod.
Just to wrap up this new coaching endeavor, I know a lot of people who are watching this are going to be interested in how to get involved or how to apply for it. And I just wanted to know exactly what level of player are you targeting, or are you going to see what kind of response you receive and then figure it out?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So the application process is just it's a show of interest. It's just a questionnaire. There's no commitment up front, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to make pods or study groups that are of the same player type, similar stakes. Everyone should ideally be playing the same format at the very least, right? So the applications don't necessarily mean you're going to be starting right away. Like we're not saying, if you sign up by April 1st, then you're going to be, in a group by April 2nd. That's not really how this works. So I would encourage anyone to apply and just detail, like, here's what I'm playing. Here's approximately what I'm trying to do in poker. I want to get from this point to that point. That's pretty much how the questions are geared. And once we have a sizable group of, say, mid stakes 6-max cash players, or small stakes heads up no limit players, or mid to high stakes live cash players. Once we have like that group ready, then we contact everyone and we say like, hey, your group is ready to go. We start on this date.
Cool. Now more fun stuff. So the last time you were on the pod, we talked a little bit about your Instagram and making beautiful looking food. I just wanted an update because I don't know if we covered last time that you actually considered leaving poker to be a professional chef. I want to hear all about that. I think a lot of people leave their jobs for poker, and you don't really hear people like leaving poker for some like crazy goal like that. How far did you get?
I'm trying,
as a
Jamie.
chef? I know Ben's been trying to leave poker forever. It's not going well. But he is a professional podcaster now, so there's that. But how far did you go, and like when did you decide that you wanted to stick with poker? And is the culinary dream still alive for the very far future?
Yeah, so I guess around 2016, 2017, I was feeling pretty burnt out about poker, and I mean, heads up no limit, it was still pretty good, and it was still being played online quite a bit. But that was actually like a time when I had devoted a lot of my time to coaching and staking. I was working with like a group of heads up players, and to be honest, like if there was a game running, like one of them was playing it. So it wasn't really a situation where I was like playing that much myself actively. I was way more like living through them vicariously and just like being the mentor and watching them play. And it was around then that I just like started part-time taking classes at is George Brown College in Toronto, for anyone who's familiar. Like, quite a good culinary program. They offer evening classes. I was like, sweet, I can just spend like my Tuesday evenings or my Thursday evenings learning about this thing that I'm interested in, because I was cooking a lot at home at the time. And as I often do with hobbies, I latched on immediately and took on a full-time course schedule like within a couple of months, and just sort of found myself in a 2-year program to do chef training. And I guess the program was called Culinary Management Diploma. So that just kind of happened, and I was like way more enjoying that than I was enjoying playing poker. So I did it, and just like I switched to full time in 2017. I completed the program in 2018, and then they like the end of the program is like practical, right? So they put you in some like in-house restaurant work for a little bit, and then you essentially just like apply for jobs and you go out and you work in the restaurant industry. So I was working for this catering company. It was really fun. I had this like cool chef who's a friend of mine now. Like we still chat on Instagram every now and then. He was like, he taught me a huge percentage of what I know about cooking now. But that was just like super fun. But once I was actually working in the restaurant, I kind of started to see the path and like the negatives of that industry, and like the excitement that I was having, I think, as I was learning like super, super quickly and having all these like fun experiences in a controlled environment where I was still like, I still had coaching as a side gig and poker as like a side gig. It was just, I think at some point it like started to become really real, and I was like, it wasn't panning out exactly the way that I wanted it to as like a full career. And I think it was around that time that PokerStars ran like the 25K PSPC in the Bahamas. And I was like, I think I'm going to go to that. That sounds like a really good tournament. And I went there and like met a bunch of people and had an amazing time. And then some people told me, I think it was the next month, at another actually, it would have been probably at the Niagara Falls V Classic. Might have been a tournament you were at, Ben. That they were starting to announce the Party Poker Live schedule. There were like all these big 10K main events, and they were saying like, oh, we're going to give there's a promotion. If you play 5 10K main events, we'll give you an extra 10K buy-in for free. And I was like, okay, that sounds pretty appealing to like, now I'm like nudging my way into the live tournament world. And as I did with cooking a couple of years earlier, I was like, I just like latched on. I was like, okay, I'm just going to spend the whole year playing live tournaments. So that's what I did and found some success there. And so the cooking parts, it never really panned out as a full-time gig, unfortunately. But now I cook a lot at home and work on my, home cooking recipes and efficiency and all that. And Instagram's just like my place to share what I'm working on.
Yeah, I was going to say too, to compliment you, you're one of the least obnoxious food posters that I've ever seen, because I like this stuff on Instagram. I check it out, but I feel like there's this obsession with everything looking perfect and everything being very fancy and very complicated. And I was looking through yours, and it's like some things are very fancy and complicated, but that some of them are like, well, I used some frozen stuff on this, or like, oh, this is leftovers, and then I made this extra thing with it. And you're just not an asshole. Your cooking like seems like something that's like relatable, where I don't feel like super intimidated or like, oh, I could never make something that looks like this. Are you going for that? Or is it just like, this is authentically what you want to be making and you're just putting out whatever looks nice?
Yeah, I think the reality is like, probably if you scrolled back to my like April or May, when like we were just getting into lockdowns and I had way too much time on my hands to cook, I was probably really like knocking it out of the park. Like every day it was like, I'm going to do a roast chicken and I'm going to do like pasta from scratch, and I'm going to do like all this from scratch, just like super ambitious stuff. And then I think like June, July, August, probably my posting frequency starts to go down. And then fast forward to now, and I'm just like, this is real life. Like, this is what I eat. It's not that complicated. I don't make 4-hour dinners anymore. Yeah. That's just like, this is just literally what I'm eating. I don't share everything because it's not always all that photogenic. There's no way around that with just like some messy stuff or some takeout food or whatnot. But sometimes I'll share that as well. Yeah, it's basically just what I'm actually eating, and I like to especially if I feel like I did something like nice with what I make. I'm just like proud of that, and I want to share it.
Yeah, my stuff's worse than that. I think the last time we talked, I was at level 0 cooking, where I'm like, I have no idea. I'm like, I'm looking at YouTube to be like, how do you like bake a chicken? Like I didn't know how to do anything. Now I'm at like level 1, but I'm like learning through those foods delivery service things like Plated and Blue Apron, but they're actually pretty helpful, because it's like, you don't have to do the annoying things, which is like, go to the grocery store, figure out 20 things you need to buy, waste half of it because you're not going to use like shallots like after you're done using a tiny bit. So everything is kind of portioned out. And then what we've been doing is making that and then trying to like replicate it without their help. And it actually has been very helpful, where I feel like I don't suck now, where I'm like, I at least can like feed people without them pretending to like the food. And it's just fun. Like, I feel like learning stuff like that will always be useful. Like your culinary school experience, like let's say you never make money from it. It's still so useful. And like, I'm sure your friends, your girlfriend, your family are happy that you can make really good stuff when you go to holidays and things like that. But we talked off the pot a little bit about how like poker players tend to like try to monetize everything. Like we try to optimize everything, and we try to like, wow, I'm good at this thing and I'm interested in it. Let me beat it to death. Like, let's just do it until I'm the best at it and then hate it. How did you decide to, like, I know poker kind of like called you back with all these good tournaments and everything, but how do you still have the like love for cooking? Like, you didn't kill it by overdoing it. Did you just like get out in time because you've learned to do this and to keep your hobbies fun, or how did you get out?
Yeah, that's a complicated question, I think, because well, at least when it comes to cooking, I think a big part of it is just that I love eating as well. And as, you know, contrary to what I would have done 10 years ago, which is just spend way too much money at nice restaurants, I think I kind of beat that to death. I kind of I just spent too much at nice restaurants, and then eventually got the cooking skills to realize that I could like be just as happy with the food that I make because I can make it really delicious for like nowhere near that kind of price point. So part of it is practical, but I do think that I put a lot of conscious effort, for better or for worse, into like shutting out this idea that everything's about maximizing EV. I think that was like, maybe I was just lucky because like I wasn't doing like mental game coaching or anything like reflective at the time, but there was just like something that told me like this is really unhealthy for you, and like you're not enjoying what you're doing when you like are literally, you know, sleeping with your laptop next to you with the sounds on max in case like a Chinese whale comes at 3 a.m. Like that's not, I hated that. Like
I think I had a similar experience early in poker where like every time my friends would want to hang out, I would just always be thinking about, well, like this is my hourly to sit at my computer. I'm like, would I want to spend $600 on a trip to the beach right now? And I think if you get stuck in that framework, or if you get attached to that framework to the point where it's the only lens you view things through, burnout's inevitable, and your life, it just becomes this joyless husk of EV. Humans aren't really EV machines, right? We're joy seeking. We're not money seeking, and the money is very useful for eliminating impediments to joy, but it doesn't bring joy by itself unless you're a psychopath.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, unfortunately, and I might be wrong about this. This is just like the path that I went through, but I think it was kind of necessary to go through the transition of like regular person to like EV machine back to regular person. Because if I didn't switch my mentality to like kind of obsessing with expected value, then I don't necessarily think poker would have worked out all that well. I could be wrong about that. Like, I am sure that there are people who are successful in poker without obsessing over EV, but they certainly don't get to an expert level quickly, and they certainly don't, you know, maximize their chance of growing a bankroll. And those things, like, they helped me so much. Like, they put me in a position of privilege to be able to step back and say, okay, now I don't need to hunt EV anymore, right? Like, if I want to be healthy and pursue other things at any point in my life, I can't just be sitting at my computer 16 hours a day because that's what's maximizing today's hourly. But I think I needed like that kind of path of perspective, right? Because yeah, I mean, it's the robotic minds that crush poker, right? Just specifically poker.
Yeah, I think it's good to have gone through that, because it's not like when you stop being an EV seeking robot that you lose all the skills and all the knowledge that you learned for the time that you were like that. It's just like going to culinary school. Now that you're like, oh, I'm just a rec cook, I don't do it for a living. It's not like you forget all the stuff you learned. So you've like improved yourself in the short term by going super, super hard. And then now you like reassess your life and you're like, how much of a part of my life do I want cooking to be? How much of a part of my life do I want poker to be? Do I want to be more of a coach than a player or whatever? And it's not like you lost all those skills. It's like great to have gone through that like slightly psychotic time, I guess, to now like find your life balance. And I feel like Fedor was on our pod, and he kind of mirrored what you said, with just that he had to go really hard at something and put 2,500 hours in a year. And then he completely withdrew and did like 200 hours to figure out like what kind of life balance he wants is somewhere in the middle. And it's like, if you're doing 2,500 hours and the next year you're like, oh, I need a little more time, I'll do 2,400 hours and take a little time off. You don't really like find out as quickly like what kind of balance you want as when you go from one extreme to the other. But it seems like from what you're saying, it wasn't like very intentional, that you kind of just like figured it out in the middle of like doing the cooking thing.
Yeah, I really can't take credit for like some sort of master plan. I mean, but it is like you said, like there's now I kind of have the tools to say, you know, whatever it is that I want to accomplish in the next like year or 3 years or 5 years, like now I could devote a small or medium or large amount of my attention to poker because I know I've done all those things. Like I know how to do those things well. Same with focusing on coaching, or I guess that's kind of been the latest thing that I've like grabbed onto and probably spent like too much focus on is like building up a coaching business and trying to be like as good of a coach as possible. And I'm sure that's going to pull back at some point and go through the same process.
That's a really cool, like, I feel like I'm learning something from listening to you talk about this, because I think one of my problems why I don't go so hard at things is because I just extrapolate way too far in the future. And in 10 years, am I going to want to be studying this hard at poker? Am I going to want to do this forever? It's like, instead, maybe just letting yourself be a little psychotic with it for a month. Like, if you feel the urge to just like try to master something, then just like go for it in the short term. And then if you experience burnout, like reassess and do something else, or just like pull back a little bit. And it doesn't have to be a thing that like you do forever. I was in that mentality when I worked at a law firm. So I was like, okay, do I want to be doing this in 30 years? No. So I'm going to quit today. Like, that's how I was, instead of just being like, well, you spent 3 years in law school and all this money getting this degree, why not work for 5 years and bank a bunch of money? But it was this thing where I'm like, if I'm not going to want to be like this forever, I don't want to be like this for one more minute. But I kind of think that like your way just sounds a lot more reasonable. And like abandoning things a little too early may have been like my problem. But what do you think about people who are starting to study poker now? Like, I think that that's what's this daunting thing in my mind that's like overshadowing everything else. When people are talking about RTA, they're talking about how like even the bad players aren't that bad anymore. That there's not as much just like free money EV floating around. What advice would you give to someone like me who's like wondering, is it worth it to like get hardcore into poker again?
Yeah, I think, well, I guess that's a fairly loaded question because, you know, similar to what you just described with your law school experience, like there's the money you could make. There's also just like how much you enjoy the process. There's also just like kind of how motivated you are, like hungry you are for this particular thing right now. But I think that there's still a lot of opportunity in poker. It's just not, you know, not every sort of method of being a poker player that worked 10 years ago still exists. I think that, you know, that like that kind of classic story of like the kid who likes poker, who has a tiny bankroll, like $0, and slowly moves their way up the ranks until they're a crusher. Like it's very, very, very difficult to do that. Whereas for someone like you, who's, you know, experienced in poker and has a background in poker, but just wants to like either get up to speed or like move into a new format or something, like I think it's just about targeting your approach. I mean, this is like a lot of the coaching that I do, which again is like maybe different from how people perceive what coaching is. Like, I think a lot of people think what coaching is I don't know things, my coach knows things. I'm going to go into a coaching session and they're going to teach me all the things. And that's like hardly ever what I'm doing when I coach someone. It's just like, here's the most efficient path towards being better than you are today. Like, here's, you know, we've tracked like all the things you're trying to accomplish. Maybe it's, you know, to move from 2-5 live to 10-20 live. Maybe it's to move from, you know, daily tournaments at the Win to like the kind of series main event, you know, buy-in stakes or whatever. Just like trying to feel like you can go from like step A to step B. It's just about like having a clearer picture of like what exactly, like what's the end goal, right? And I think a coach should just have like the experience and understanding of like what's the difference between a good and great and elite player, and like what are they doing differently, and also what's the learning process to get from good to great to elite. And that's like I swear I'm not trying to sell you my coaching, but that's very
please,
much...
please. This is a great sell. I think this is a very, I'm impressed by how sort of intentional you are about it. Cause I think there's lots of people who are good poker players who think, oh, I'm going to coach for whatever reason. I'm going to stream. I'm going to do this in an effort to monetize it or lower their variance or whatever. But it sounds like you've been very deliberate and introspective about what is the best way to help a player build themselves up. And I think that's, shill that a little bit more. That's great. Run it once. Thoughtful coaches.
That's definitely the goal.
All right. That wasn't much of a shill, but we'll take it.
I was going to say one thing though, before wrapping up. I was stalking your blog a little bit. I enjoy your writing, and I did notice though on the coaching part that you got an endorsement from Galfond, and I'm like, wow. I mean, that must be pretty nice. Like, I was just reading the other ones because like coach people that you've coached and whatever, and then Galfond said that he watches your videos more than anyone else's, and I was like, that. I mean, That has to be like the nicest review of all time, right?
That was pretty nice. He said that, I think, in like a Run It Once promo clip or something like a couple of years ago, but it wasn't exactly like, shoved in anyone's faces or anything. But certainly when I decided to put, my coaching services on a website, I wasn't going to pass on an opportunity to just like take that blurb and just smack it right on the homepage.
Dude, that would be like my Twitter bio. Are you kidding me? Just totally shameless.
Twitter profile is just a picture of Phil's face instead, and with a little quote bubble coming out saying those exact words.
Yeah, to be fair, he has exposure to my videos and not my actual coaching methods, but I did think still that was a nice thing of him to
we're going to be a little
he's
unfair.
recommended.
We're just gonna run with the positive.
Yeah, we're just gonna have on this pod will be titled "Phil Galfond learned everything he knows from K-Rab."
Kevin, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I think you gave some really insightful and interesting answers. I'm looking forward to, as you are, I'm sure, seeing how the NO program goes and seeing how much you can help build others up. And if you want to apply, go to runitonce.com and fill out a form, and it might be your lucky day.